So it is absolutely critical that we dismantle that network of extremists that are willing to attack us. And they are currently, well, they absolutely are a threat to us. They're a significant threat to us. I wouldn't be deploying young men and women into harm's way if I didn't think that they were an absolute threat to us. Now, General McChrystal's strategy, which I think is the right one, is that we are going to clear out Taliban strongholds. We are going to strengthen the capacity of the Afghan military, and we are going to get them stood up in a way that allows us then to start drawing down our troops, but continuing to provide support for Afghan in its effort to create a stable government. It is a difficult process. At the same time, we've also got to work with Pakistan so that they are more effective partners in dealing with the extremists that are within their borders. And it is a big, messy process, but we are making progress in part because the young men and women under General McChrystal's supervision, as well as our coalition partners, are making enormous sacrifices, but also on the civilian side, we're starting to make progress in terms of building capacity that will allow us then to draw down with an effective partner. Okay. Jackie Combs, New York Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is this on? Okay. I want to follow up on something exchange you had with Chip. Leaving aside the existing permits for drilling in the Gulf, weeks before BP, you had called for expanded drilling. Do you now regret that decision, and why did you do so, knowing what you have described today about the sort of dysfunction in the MMS?
I continue to believe what I said at that time, which was that domestic oil production is an important part of our overall energy mix. It has to be part of an overall energy strategy. I also believe that it is insufficient to meet the needs of our future, which is why I've made huge investments in clean energy, why we continue to promote solar and wind and biodiesel and a whole range of other approaches, why we're putting so much emphasis on energy efficiency. But we're not going to be able to transition to these clean energy strategies right away. I mean, we're still years off and some technological breakthroughs away from being able to operate on purely a clean energy grid. During that time, we're going to be using oil. And to the extent that we're using oil, it makes sense for us to develop our oil and natural gas resources here in the United States and not simply rely on imports. That's important for our economy. That's important for economic growth. So the overall framework, which is to say domestic oil production should be part of our overall energy mix, I think continues to be the right one. Where I was wrong was in my belief that the oil companies had their act together when it came to worst-case scenarios. Now, that wasn't based on just my blind acceptance of their statements. Oil drilling has been going on in the Gulf, including Deepwater, for quite some time. And the record of accidents like this we hadn't seen before. But it just takes one for us to have a wake-up call and recognize that claims that fail-safe procedures were in place or that blowout preventers would function properly or that valves would switch on and shut things off, that whether it's because of human error, because of the technology was faulty, because when you're operating at these depths you can't anticipate exactly what happens, those assumptions proved to be incorrect. And so I'm absolutely convinced that we have to do a thoroughgoing scrub of those safety procedures and those safety records. And we have to have confidence that even if it's just a 1 in a million shot, that we've got enough technology, know-how, that we can shut something like this down not in a month, not in 6 weeks, but in 2 or 3 or 4 days. And I don't have that confidence right now. Sure.
Are you sorry now, do you regret that your team had not done the reforms at the Minerals Management Service that you've subsequently called for? And I'm also curious as how it is that you didn't know about Ms. Birnbaum's resignation/firing before.
Well, you're assuming it was a firing. If it was a resignation, then she would have submitted a letter to Mr. Salazar this morning at a time when I had a whole bunch of other stuff going on.
You ruled out that she was fired.
Come on, Jackie, I don't know. I'm telling you, I found out about it this morning. So I don't yet know the circumstances, and Ken Salazar's been in testimony on the Hill. With respect to your first question, at MMS, Ken Salazar was in the process of making these reforms. But the point that I'm making is that obviously they weren't happening fast enough. If they had been happening fast enough, this might have been caught. Now, it's possible that it might not have been caught. All right? I mean, we could have gone through a whole new process for environmental review. You could have had a bunch of technical folks take a look at BP's plans, and they might have said, this meets industry standards. We haven't had an accident like this in 15 years, and we should go ahead. That's what this commission has to discover is, was this a systemic breakdown? Is this something that could happen once in a million times? Is it something that could happen once in 1,000 times or once every 5,000 times? What exactly are the risks involved? Now, let me make one broader point, though, about energy. The fact that oil companies now have to go a mile underwater and then drill another 3 miles below that in order to hit oil tells us something about the direction of the oil industry. Extraction is more expensive, and it is going to be inherently more risky. And so that's part of the reason you never heard me say, drill, baby, drill, because we can't drill our way out of the problem. It may be part of the mix as a bridge to a transition to new technologies and new energy sources. But we should be pretty modest in understanding that the easily accessible oil has already been sucked up out of the ground. And as we are moving forward, the technology gets more complicated, the oil sources are more remote, and that means that there's probably going to end up being more risk. And we as a society are going to have to make some very serious determinations in terms of what risks are we willing to accept. And that's part of what the Commission, I think, is going to have to look at. I will tell you, though, that understanding we need to grow, we're going to be consuming oil for our industries and for how people live in this country. We're going to have to start moving on this transition. And that's why when I went to the Republican caucus just this week, I said to them, let's work together. You've got Lieberman and Kerry, who previously were working with Lindsey Graham, even though Lindsey's not on the bill right now, coming up with a framework that has the potential to get bipartisan support and says, yes, we're going to still need oil production, but you know what? We can see what's out there on the horizon. And it's a problem if we don't start changing how we operate. Okay. Macarena Vidal. Not here? Oh, there you are.
Mr. President, you announced, or the White House announced on 2 days ago that you were going to send 1,200 people to 1,200 members of the National Guard to the border. I wanted to if you could precise what their target is going to be, what you're planning to achieve with that, if you could clarify a bit more the mission that they're going to have. And also on Arizona, after you having criticized so much the immigration law that has been approved there, would you support the boycott that some organizations are calling towards that state?
Okay. I've indicated that I don't approve of the Arizona law. I think it's the wrong approach. I understand the frustrations of the people of Arizona and a lot of folks along the border that border has not been entirely secured.